Oh, hello. Welcome to the inaugural webinar for Capital Questions. This is something brought to you by the National Review Institute, and it is going to be the first of a new product, I hate to use that term, from Capital Matters, and we are the part of the organization that stands for free markets and for explaining the how markets operate and how they work and how the advantages that we think that they bring. My name is Andrew Stuttaford, and I'm editor of the Capital Matters. And my background, for anyone who doesn't know, is which may be everyone, I should imagine, is basically once a lawyer and then many years in the financial markets. And that means that my colleague Dominic Pino, our National Review's new economics editor, but he's been really that for a long time, and he occasionally thinks that I look too much at the markets. And so, you're concentrating too much about that. You want to think about more fundamentals here. And obviously, we're here today to talk about tariffs. And the idea is that Dominic and I, and this will be the first of a series, and tariffs are obviously very much in the news at the moment. I was listening to the radio this morning and it was filled with angry Canadians. That doesn't happen often. And but there will be other topics, and we are always grateful to hear from you, things that you would like to talk about, because this is a Q&A, and your input, and we're grateful for the donors and the subscribers who make all this possible in the end. And you have a say too. So we would like to hear from you what you would like us to be, Dominic and I would like to be talking about. Dominic, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yep, I'm Dominic Pino. We wanted to do this style of event because we really like hearing what our subscribers and donors have to say, and we've done a couple of these sort of as one-off things in the past, and we really enjoyed the questions we got. We think you guys are have a lot of good ideas that we want to hear about, and it challenges us too to think through some of these issues and be able to discuss what's going on with the economy. So, this one we wanted to focus on tariffs just because that's such a big topic today, especially because this is the third or fourth deadline now that where the tariffs are supposed to be taking effect. And so we wanted to focus on that. But, we want to make this a monthly thing. So going forward in the future, we'll have different topics that'll line up too. So any questions that you have, you can put in the Q&A function here on Zoom. You can type them in there, and then we'll be able to see those and answer them. We had a couple of questions by email before as well. That was good for before this started, but now that we're going, please use the function on Zoom so you can go to the Q&A box and type in there, and we'll be looking to get going on that. So I guess just to start off, just to kind of set the playing field on some of this stuff. Like I said, this is a new tariff deadline. April 2nd was the original one. Then the administration delayed a lot of these things and did a bunch of one-off deals on the side with things. But now it's coming back again. The president did an executive order late last night that went through how this is going to work. Basically, if you remember the reciprocal tariff chart from April 2nd, it's sort of a redo of that with slightly different rates, but the basic same concept. What they've done is they said it's a 10% minimum tariff basically for all countries, whether we have a trade deficit or a trade surplus with that country. It's 10% minimum, and then on top of that, it's 15% minimum for countries that there's a trade deficit, and then it increases based on some random assortment of factors based on top of that, which is a combination of how big the trade deficit is and whether Donald Trump personally likes the people in that country. We saw Brazil got this extraordinarily high tariff, even though the United States has a trade surplus with Brazil. So it's not really based on what it says it's based on, which is trade deficits, and trade deficits ultimately don't matter anyway. So it's very confusing, and also probably illegal. We already have one. The Court of International Trade has ruled that the authority under which the president is doing this, which is a law called the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, does not actually give him the power to do these things. The statute does not mention tariffs at all. The appeals court heard the oral arguments for that case yesterday, and the judges seemed very skeptical of the government's lawyers. And so this, the appeals court ruling will be coming relatively soon, and then it might go to the Supreme Court after that. So this is all on very shaky ground legally, and like I said, economically doesn't make a ton of sense. So that's kind of the starting point that I'm thinking from.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think that Dominic makes an important point about well, firstly, actually, before I go to Dominic's important point, when we talk about trade deficits and trade surpluses, these are measured in tangible goods, traded goods, something that is often exempted from this discussion, and deliberately so, is services, because the US has a trade surplus in services. Think of the stuff on the internet, and the Googles of this world and all the rest of it. And this is why underlying this, and I hope this is wrong, but underlying this, there is a thought that the trade is something to be regarded through narrowed eyes and suspicion. And Dominic said just then, some of the people who have been taken to the wood or whatever, to the back of the building for a rough treatment, are people who actually have surpluses with us. And there is also the question of certain goods are, one of the arguments for free trade, which we can talk about, or protectionism, which we can talk about, is that we want to encourage our own domestic manufacturers to produce these things. Now, we can talk about whether that's in certain circumstances wise, but on the other hand, Brazil, coffee. Now, climate change is doing its bit, and I'm told, but the reality is that we cannot conceivably satisfy our own demand for coffee. The US is the biggest importer of coffee in the world. We grow coffee here and there. You can spend a lot of money and you can buy Hawaiian coffee, for example, but we don't. There are some of Puerto Rico also. There's a little bit in California, but the point is that we are to slap a tax on coffee isn't to protect American producers. You could call it a consumption tax. You could call it a VAT. Maybe we'll try that name. See how that plays. And equally, if you look at the humble banana, which is an enormous success in free trade over the years. It was introduced in the late 19th century into this country. It basically was one of those late 19th century exhibits, and everyone liked it. And it was also for the new country, which had this new increasingly large population who wanted good nutrition. It was pound for pound much, much cheaper than apples, believe it or not. And so in come the bananas. They don't grow here. Again, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, bits of Florida, but they don't really grow here, and the climate doesn't work for it. So that's where the banana republics came from. Perhaps not a glorious episode in American history, perhaps cheap food, nevertheless. And one of the few good things that the evil Woodrow Wilson did was, because I spent a lot of time on AI checking banana tariffs, 1890s and afterwards. I beat AI. And one of the few things he did was he stopped a tariff being introduced on bananas when he became president. So again, who are these banana producers we are protecting? What we're doing is we are imposing a tax on a basic American foodstuff. So some of the rationale for, as Dominic has already alluded to, some of the rationale for what we're doing and how we're doing it doesn't seem to make much sense.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started with the questions. The first one I see here is it says, I've heard a lot of gloating that the tariffs did not have the bad effects that many thought they would. Any ideas why that has not happened yet? I would say one of the reasons why is that the president delayed a lot of the tariffs. These were supposed to take effect back in April, and a lot of them didn't, and now they're taking effect now. So, what part of what the president did if they had actually all taken effect back in April immediately, like the original order said, you would have seen a lot worse effects. But what they've kind of done is spread out a lot of that, and a lot of the country by country stuff has spread it out as well. So that the burden of it has sort of been distributed, but we're going to see a lot more if these ultimately get upheld by the courts and ultimately are allowed, because what a lot of businesses have been able to do, first of all, it takes a long time for stuff to get across the ocean. So whatever tariff change happens, it'll take about a month even just for the goods that were shipped before the tariff started to even show up in the United States. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is businesses have inventories, and we saw a lot of stockpiling that businesses did in the first quarter of this year to sort of have inventories built up so that they can use those without having to pay the tariffs. But those will run out eventually, and then you'll basically what I would expect to see if these get upheld and are permitted as the president has declared in this executive order is that you'll have very sporadic and seemingly random effects of this show up over the next couple of years. They're not going to be positive effects, and if you add them all up cumulatively, it'll be significant. A lot of the estimates that I've seen talk about, anywhere between like $1,000 and $3,000 per household. That's significant money. I think we can all agree that's a major tax increase. We would, if the income tax went up by that much, we would say that that's a big deal. So. It's not a recession, it's not a depression, it's not the end of the world, but it's bad, and it would be better if it wasn't happening.
Yeah, I think Dominic's point is all about inventory management is very, very important. This, if you like, is a little bit like the phony war. And so it is way to us, autumn of 1939, things seem to be going fine here. And we haven't really seen it get going. There's an interesting case study in the case of Ford. I wrote about it on the corner early this morning. They are taking I think it's a $2 billion hit because of tariffs. And there was an interesting interview with the CEO, I think CEO or CFO, and who said that because car companies, and one of the things that Dominic and I may touch on is that there is not a lot of what people in Britain call joined up thinking going on here. And so if you're a car company, you import aluminum. There we are. I'll make the effort and steel, and you have to for now. And the Ford produces most of its stuff in the US, but it's paying in many instances 50% tax on aluminum and steel as well, and that is beginning to the cost of that is beginning to run into the billions. Now, what they said in the interview I read was that exactly what Dominic referred to, they basically manufactured as many cars as they could ahead of the tariffs biting. And so there you have an American manufacturer changing its manufacturing schedule in order to beat the tariffs. And there is a message in that, by the way. And but what the person interviewed said is this year we'll probably only increase prices by about 1%. That's not a lot, but someone's going to have to be paying that money, and it's great for the consumers. And they said, well, and this is next year. It could be a different ball game. Perhaps they're waiting for the Supreme Court. But that money is still being paid, and that means the profits of the company are going to be lower, and by a lot. And if a company is less profitable, it's going to have less money to hire people. It's going to have less money to increase workers' wages, which I thought was one of the goals of this. And it is going to have less money to innovate and to expand production. Now, you may say, why not make so why can't we just use American aluminum? And the answer to that is we can a bit, but aluminum is a very, very energy intensive product. In my old life, I used to deal with a Norwegian company, which was a major aluminium producer, and the CEO said to me, think of aluminum as molten electricity. It consumes vast amounts of electricity. Canada has vast amounts of hydropower. So it was logical that Alcoa should move their or have some of their production up to take advantage of that cheap hydropower up in Canada. 70% of that, what is used, goes to supply American consumers. So they get the aluminum cheaper. And by consumers, by the way, I'm in many cases referring to people like the car companies. So you say, well, okay, well, we've got to adjust. Well, how you deal with the lack of the dams, I don't know. But it takes about 2 to 8 years to build a new aluminum smelter by the time the bureaucracy has finished with it. So we got in the inflationary area, there's a lot of talk about transitory. Well, adjusting to that, as I said, 8 years, and there's still the basic cost of the electricity problem that hasn't gone away. So the idea, one of the things that we are told, is that this is going to be a one-off, one nasty, or Dominic is right when he says there'll be dribs and drabs. There'll be this, there'll be that, there'll be the nasty shock when you go to the supermarket for this product or that product. But the idea that this is going to be over in 12 months is absolute nonsense, because you cannot reorient sophisticated supply chains in 12 months. You've got to build and you've got to invest, and you're not going to invest if you're talking billions, in some cases you are, unless you know what the law is going to be. And tariffs are going to be discussed a lot. And that is not politically, that's not going to be an encouragement to invest.
Yeah. All right. There's just looking at one question that I want to cover because I think it's important. Is Charles asks, don't many of our trading partners have higher tariffs than the U.S.? And the answer to this is no. And it's really important. There's been a very concentrated effort by the president to make it out that the U.S. is the only free trade country in the world, and everybody else has high tariffs and does all these barriers and all this stuff. Neither side of that is true. The first point is that the U.S. is not some kind of free trade paradise. There are all sorts of barriers and protections that the U.S. puts in place for all the same reasons that lots of other countries do, which is that you have domestic political interests that are very cozy with politicians and cozy with government, and they get them to enact various protections for them to block foreign competition. So that is very much something that the United States has done for a very long time and has continued to do in the last several years. Now, it is also true that globally there is a trend towards freer trade, and the U.S. has been part of that trend. And so, if you look at average tariff rates between the United States and many of the United States' largest trading partners, those average rates are very, very low. It's somewhere, in the neighborhood of 1 to 3% on average for both the U.S. and for our other trading partners. And the reason for that is that countries have realized in general that free trade is better for them economically. And it was an effort that was led by the United States, especially since the end of World War II, to try to get the reduction of trade barriers around the world. Ronald Reagan said that he wanted to have a Western Hemisphere free trade zone, so North and South America. The U.S. was moving in that direction under the Bush administration, for example, several different trade agreements with countries like Chile and Peru, and the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which includes Dominican Republic, Honduras, several other countries down there. And that was very much part of U.S. policy. Then in the Obama administration, that all kind of stopped. Obama, he wanted the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then that didn't end up happening. He basically got talked out of it by the unions and by other groups against free trade within the Democratic coalition. And then, really, since then, the U.S. has basically stopped increasing free trade under the first Trump administration, under the Biden administration, and now under the second Trump administration as well. Biden kept most of Trump's trade policies in place. So that U.S. legacy, I think, has really been reversed since about 2016, 2015, and I think that's unfortunate because I think this was a major win for the United States overall. Um, so uh, uh, so most countries that the U.S. trades with, which by the way are other rich countries. This is another misconception about global trade, that this is all done with poor countries with low labor costs and such and so on. Most, the U.S.'s largest trading partners are Mexico and Canada because they border us, and then Europe and China and the UK. China is poorer than those other ones, but it is not a poor country by global standards. It's middle income, and the U.S. Mostly trades with other rich countries, and this makes sense, right? Because what do Americans want to buy? They generally want to buy high quality goods that come from rich places. We don't do a lot of trade with Cambodia because they don't make a lot of stuff there that Americans want to buy. Um, so if you look at the countries that have high tariff barriers, they're generally very poor countries. And the reason for that is that tariffs are a very easy way for countries to collect taxes. So if you don't have a very sophisticated government, and you don't have a very sophisticated bureaucracy, and you don't have a lot of trust in the society that people will actually follow the law, it's very easy to send a customs official to a port and have them collect taxes on goods as they come into your country. And so, as countries get richer in general, they rely less on tariffs because they have better ways to collect taxes that aren't as distortive. Another question on here mentioned, we have a big budget deficit. Let's use tariffs to raise some money. The government clearly needs to raise more money. And the answer to that is, the way to think about taxes is that all taxes are bad, but some are worse than others. And tariffs are definitely in the worst category because a good tax should have a very broad base and a very low rate, right? And the reason for that is you don't want to be distorting economic activity that would happen in the absence of the tax. So an example of a better tax is a thing like property taxes, for example, which have very broad base, right? Real property is a very broad base. It's very valuable, it's very large, and it's pretty stable. And the property tax rates are really, really low, right? Your property tax rate is usually measured in mils, not even in full percentage points, right? That's a pretty good form of tax. Tariff is the total opposite of that, right? You have an extremely narrow base. You're talking about specific goods that come from specific countries, right? That's a tiny tax base, and the rates, as we saw from the president's table, are really, really high. Between 10 and 50%. So tariff is a really bad form of taxation. So even if you think we should raise taxes, which I generally don't, but even if you think we should, tariffs are a really bad way to go about it.
Yes, I mean, I think that I will dissent, and this will happen on this series. Not for now, but there will be a bitter and brutal session of capital questions on the question of property taxes, which I fundamentally oppose. So not all of us are communists here, And the very good question. The two quick ones. Question from Edwin. The aluminium regulations, of course, can be reduced and should be, and that is a thing that this administration generally is doing quite well with. The problem is still the electricity price. Non-tariff barriers. A couple of questions here. Non-tariff barriers are very, very important. And what they are is that they say that, a tariff is a tariff. It's straightforward. Whatever else you say, you pay 15%, and in comes your good. But then there is below that, there are the so-called non-tariff barriers, which are they can be quality checks. Famously, there was when everyone was terrified of Japanese VCRs back in the day, there was some rule, and the US took steps on that, but there was some talk. The French were very unhappy, and they said, okay, free trade. You can have all your VCRs, Japan, and you can send them to France. Will be happy consumers. Unfortunately, there's only going to be one place in France where we will be checking VCRs, and it was some provincial town. So of course it was absolutely hopeless. The Argentines they had some checking in Tierra del Fuego, which is on the way down to Antarctica. So that's a classic non-tariff barrier. But what you do see is you see in the EU, and I think that, and I suspect that that's what the question might be, is Stephanie refers specifically to to the EU here, is an egregious offender in this respect. And one example of that, they hate American success. They're very jealous of the success in American high tech. One of the successes of free trade, I might add. And so what they do is they don't directly put tariffs on them, but what they do is they find that they're in breach of antitrust rules. So they have weaponized antitrust. I've been writing about this for many years now. I used to do a bit of antitrust, and in massive fines. And the real idea is to either stop the competition from American high tech, but as they don't have any high tech of their own, that is a rather self-defeating move. So instead, they're going to loot it. And that has been going on. Vice President Vance has been saying some good stuff about that. But the question is, how do you deal with it? And I think the way to deal with it, and I think this is going to be a very big issue, is you're going to deal with it case by case by case. We cannot have American companies being fined and billions, sometimes hundreds of millions, I'll leave it at hundreds of millions, wildly, if you compare any way that damages are calculated in EU antitrust, these fines are absolutely ludicrous. That is a non-tariff barrier. And they don't apply, they do apply domestically within the EU. The second half of the question, there are non-tariff barriers within the EU. And the EU recently, they had a chap called Draghi, who was president of the European Central Bank, very smart, rather wily fellow, but he wrote a good report pointing out one of the things he put, what was wrong in Europe is the amount of quasi-tariff, these tariff barriers that they have between European countries. But that's up to them. But within for the US, we need, I think, on a focused basis, take an aggressive look at these fines and these other barriers and get used to the idea, sound bossy saying that, to hearing about I can't remember, the carbon border adjustment fee, I think, just like congestion charges, are fees, not taxes. What the EU is planning to introduce from next year is in countries that do not have sufficient pricing mechanisms for carbon, and that will include the US undoubtedly, there will be a fee to equalize, to put in a deemed amount onto the cost of some carbon intensive goods. It's going to apply to carbon. Let's say cement. And the American supplier, doesn't have to be American, sends the cement for 100, but the Europeans say, oh, well, the reason you can do it at 100 and we can do it at 200 because they are deindustrializing rather rapidly is because your carbon is cheap. Shocking. So we will slap a fee to compensate so we can compete levelly, because you're cheating by allowing your energy market not to be insanely crippled by net zero. And so we're going to jack up the price and charge this. If they carry on with that, and with the EU legislation comes, goes, passes, is postponed, if that happens next year, I think you're going to see a very major bust up between the EU and the US over that.
Yeah, so there's several questions in the queue about the legal challenge, so I want to address those kind of all together. And to do that, I want to start by sort of running through the mechanism that the president is using to do these tariffs. So, this is only talking about the so-called reciprocal tariffs. I'm not talking about the specific things on like steel or aluminum or copper or these kind of like specific goods that he's doing, but these ones that are against whole countries with rates that are supposedly reciprocal. The authority that he's using to do that, the way he's going about doing that, is he said in the April 2nd executive order, and then he re-upped it in the executive order that came out yesterday. He says that the existence of the trade deficit that the United States has, the goods trade deficit, I should say, because we have a services trade surplus that no one ever talks about. But the goods trade deficit that the United States has is a national emergency. So the president declared that under the National Emergencies Act. He said the existence of the trade deficit is a national emergency. And then because he said that, it sort of works as like legal magic words that allows him to unlock powers in the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. So the president claims. And under the authority of that act, he has done these unilateral tariffs on these different countries, and he has said that he has the right to change those and adjust those whenever he wants in perpetuity. Okay, so that's the legal mechanism he's using, and it's important to know that because that is not the normal legal mechanism by which presidents impose tariffs. In my view, my reading of the Constitution, I think it's pretty clear that Article 1 says that tariffs are a power of Congress, and that's where it should be. But courts have disagreed with me for many years on this and have allowed all sorts of different statutes that Congress has done to delegate some of that power to the president. But the important thing is that when those other statutes are being used, and I'm thinking of things like Section 232, Section 301, these are usually based on national security, and they're done in very, very limited ways. And so they allow the president, for example, to impose tariffs on a specific good that the president believes is important to national security and is subject to a fact-finding period with notice and comment for like a regulation would have. And so there's like a 90-day window where you have to do an investigation and you have to listen to industry, listen to consumers, and incorporate those into the policy. And then the policy is subject to reviews every 6 months. So every 6 months, the Department of Commerce or something will have to write a report to Congress and say, this tariff is achieving its goal, it's not achieving its goal, we need to adjust it, and so on. And it's restricted to those specific products, right? We saw in Trump's first term, he did this a lot. He did this with China especially, right? And those were challenged in court and they were upheld because, not my view, but in the court's view of this stuff, Congress has the ability in a limited way to delegate its power over tariffs to the president. If Trump was just doing that, if he was just going through those laws that have already been used, the courts would almost certainly uphold that. The Supreme Court, I would be confident, would uphold that. The fact that he's doing it in a completely different way, claiming emergency powers and then doing it under this law that has never before been used to implement tariffs. The IEEPA has never before been used to implement tariffs. It does not contain the word tariff in the statute at all. They're claiming that because it allows the president to regulate imports, that includes tariffs, which is not clear from the statute wording at all. That authority, I think, is not there legally, and that is what the Court of International Trade said in its decision. I'd encourage everyone to go read that decision if you want to. There are lots of cases like we've seen with this crazy Planned Parenthood case where you have clearly left-wing judges who just hate Trump and are going after him. That is not at all what happened in this Court of International Trade case. Two of the three judges on the panel that made the decision were appointed by Republicans. One of them was appointed by Reagan. The other one was appointed by Donald Trump, on the recommendation of Robert Lighthizer, his first term trade representative, who is a protectionist, right? So this is not like rigged against him, and the decision was unanimous. And it was a very, very simple separation of powers decision. They basically said, look, the Congress wrote this law about international economic emergencies. That law is subject to limitations and constraints that the president believes aren't there. And therefore, he doesn't have the authority to do this because basically what the president is claiming is complete power over tariffs. And the Constitution says that that power belongs to Congress. And previous case law has said that the Congress can only delegate that power in a limited way. And Trump is basically claiming unlimited authority over it. And so that law cannot, based on the legal doctrines about delegation, that law cannot do what the president is saying it does. And so, I think that was a very well-reasoned decision. I'll be interested to see what the Court of Appeals says. But the interesting thing about that decision too is that they cited a lot of cases that conservative justices on the Supreme Court have written. So they cited Loper Bright, which was the case that overturned Chevron deference. They cited Biden versus Nebraska, which was the case that overturned Biden's illegal student loans plan. They cited West Virginia versus EPA, which was the major questions doctrine case. And all of those cases were written by the conservative justices on the court right now. And so what they were doing, sort of subliminally with that is saying, hey, remember when you guys said all this stuff about executive power? That applies here too. And I think if the court's being consistent, I think they would strike down these things. And again, that doesn't mean the tariffs are going to completely go away. Somebody else asked, what happens if the court does strike it down? There are still all those other legal avenues available to impose tariffs. So the steel and aluminum tariffs are not going to get struck down. The copper tariffs are not going to get struck down. They want to do stuff on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. I don't think those will get struck down. But these broad country-based, supposedly reciprocal tariffs, I think they will get struck down. I'm not sure if that will actually happen. Courts do weird things sometimes that don't make sense. But based on the previous jurisprudence and based on the case from the Court of International Trade, I think those will get struck down.
And I think, Dominic, I think that people should, almost regardless of where they stand on tariffs, should want that to happen. One of the reasons that this country has done so well, in my view, is the elaborate system of checks and balances. I think it is part of the genius of the founders, and it is as good now as it was 250 years ago or so. And you don't want so much executive power to be concentrated in such an area as tariffs. You can see giving the president some room at the margin to do that, and that historically has been done here and there, starting in the 30s. But you do a thought exercise, and I think that sometimes people, I think maybe more of a weakness of people on the right, they forget that the powers that they choose to execute rather widely, they probably have more internal restraint than the people on the left who will take that precedent and run with it. Now, what if President AOC says, well, we have a climate emergency, so there's going to be heavy tariffs on any imports that contribute to climate change? You don't want these precedents lying around. And I think that, as I said, regardless of what you think about the tariffs, we want this should go back to Congress. One other thing, many other things, but I just noticed, just flashed up here, and Dominic and I'll go first and leave it to you. China. Dominic and I differ a little bit about this. I read the comments Again, I defy Charlie Cook, and who's not so keen. But I think that that I get asked this again and again and again. What about China? And the answer is I have frequently written that China is a special case. China is that doesn't mean that we should be slapping massive tariffs on the T-shirt that my son is probably wearing. I have a young son that he's wearing today. But we have to recognize that China is our very, very dangerous rival. I think I wasn't writing about I had an economics job, so a financial job. I couldn't write about economics back in the day. I suspect I would have been skeptical, highly skeptical about letting China into the WTO. I was certainly skeptical about letting Russia into the WTO. China doesn't play fair, but we have a problem. And the problem is that, and what I've argued for some time is, I'm going to cite that well-known authority, Gwyneth Paltrow, is that we have to recognize that we are very, very deeply entangled with China. So what is needed is a conscious uncoupling, to use the phrase that she used when her marriage to Chris Martin broke up. You did expect him to come up in this talk, and we have to recognize that China and the US are hopelessly entangled economically. The same is true of Europe, perhaps in fact even more so. And what is needed is a scalpel, not a chainsaw. And and we also have to do some preparation. And people say, "Oh well, Andrew, when you say scalpel, that means do nothing." No, it doesn't. It means we do it selectively, and we keep going in with that scalpel. One is not enough. I would like to see us trade much less with China, and I would like to see the reduction, particularly in anything on which we depend on China, to be substantially reduced or ideally eliminated. And we're not going about that in a very intelligent way. For example, I'll give two little examples. One is things like rare earths, which I've been writing about a bit recently. We need rare earths for EVs, ordinary cars as well. So it's not just wicked EVs, but we also need them for missiles, and we need them for fighter planes. And at the moment, China has a monopoly, a dominant position, not a monopoly, in that. We need to wean ourselves off that, and if that means paying more for them in the US, so be it. That's a defense cost to me, part of the defense budget in a way. But we can't do it until we're ready. And there seems to be very, very little thought. And China is now ruthlessly applying the rare earths weapon against us. And don't go to war, a trade war in this case, unless you have everything lined up. And we have failed to do that. Secondly, if we're worried about China and the unfair trading of China, and I think we can agree. As I said, I don't care about T-shirts and toys and things like that. But something that matters, strategic goods. Let us be smart about it. And China has a neighbor called Vietnam. Vietnamese and the Chinese have been arguing for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not millennia. They don't really like each other historically, and they don't really like each other today. And what we should be doing is we have offered Vietnam, given a better deal, certainly than was originally thought about, but if proposed. But if we are trying to reduce our vulnerability to China, we should also, tariffs are not the only thing in policy. They have to be seen as part of a whole. And part of that aim is to reduce our dependency on China. And if Vietnam, and there will be cheating, of course there will be cheating, and we can try and police it, good luck. But the more that we can dislodge away from China, and that's what I mean by unconscious coupling. Okay, I might want something ideally to be made in Indiana, but if the first step is to take it out of China and to put it into Vietnam, I'll take that progress, and then we go back to the next.
But good question in the about the status of the sort of country agreements that Trump is saying. So if the courts strike down the president's authority under IEPA to impose these tariffs, what happens to those agreements? That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure, but my speculation would be that a lot of these countries, the other countries are not treating these agreements as big of a deal as Trump is. If you look at, for example, the deal with Japan, where Trump said that Japan has agreed to create this $550 billion investment fund that the president gets to direct as for investment in the United States. The Japanese said we didn't agree to that. If you look at a lot of these agreements, for example, the agreement with Vietnam that Trump said he made 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Vietnamese government officials have never confirmed that this even happened. So I don't really think a lot of these other countries are taking this as seriously as Trump is. And so they are making these deals or sort of assenting to Trump saying that they made these deals to give him a win and get them out of their hair. I don't think they're counting on these things being permanent or lasting. So if they end up getting struck down, I don't foresee the consequences being very big. Um, but that's just really speculation on my part because I don't know how that works. And part of the problem too is most of these agreements do not have any documentation for them.
No.
I don't know what that does legally. They're really just kind of handshake deals between Trump and some foreign leader. I think that's just words. Legally speaking, I don't think there's really anything there. Ordinarily when the United States negotiates a free trade agreement, so this is important too because we haven't done one of these in many years. Um, the U.S. had 12 trade agreements with different countries before Trump came into office. The oldest one was with Israel. That was in 1985, I believe. And then the most recent one was with South Korea. And ordinarily, how these work is the president and the administration they go to these other countries. They spend a year or several years negotiating extremely specific things about different trading rules and different regulations. They make an agreement with the other country. And then both those countries go back to the US goes to Congress, the other country goes to whatever their legislature is, and they vote on these things. And then it's usually approved either as a treaty or just as some kind of agreement. And then it's a big old fat legal binding document, right? That both countries can point to and say, we agreed to these rules. They were approved by our legislatures. These are the rules now for trade between these two countries, and they're generally used to get both countries to lower their trade barriers and both countries to eliminate their tariffs. And so that's what the United States has had with. I mentioned several of those countries before. Trump has basically ripped up all of those because, the agreements basically aren't worth the paper they're written on anymore if Trump can just change the rates whenever he wants. And and he's replacing them with these like handshake deals that no one really knows what they exactly include. No one knows exactly what's been agreed to. He just announces them on his, Truth Social, and that's supposed to be like good enough for businesses to make investment decisions over decades, right? Like that's crazy. They're not going to do that. When businesses actually see a signed document that's approved by a legislature, that means something, right? They go, okay, that has some certainty that I can plan around. These things don't, and so I think if these things do get blown up, I don't think the consequences will be very big at all. And that's something that the court should keep in mind. Like if the court wants to be hesitant about breaking these up because they think it's going to be some kind of big problem, I don't think that's true. I think the president is making them out to be a very big deal because he really likes to go on social media and say, "I got this deal." But the actual practical effects of it, I think, are pretty small. And I don't think the other countries are taking it very seriously.
I think that's right. I think that 2 points there. The first is, and I don't know, and I'm looking around desperately for Dan McLaughlin and wishing that he was somewhere in the room and or Andy, and they could tell me. But I think that if the tariffs are struck down, There would also be an interesting subsidiary question whether it was ever within the authority of the president to negotiate the deals in the first place. There's a doctrine called ultra vires, which basically says if you negotiate, if I'm a company and I the CEO and I try to negotiate a sort of one-man deal with another company, but I don't have the board approval, it's ultra vires, it's beyond my power. And so I think it would be a bit messy. But Dominic's point is important that we don't really have the paperwork. The I's haven't been dotted, the T's haven't been crossed, no, nothing has been passed. And the other thing is if you look at the EU deal, and I encourage and hope people invest in the US. Don't get me wrong. And I thought in many ways that the EU deal on its own terms was actually quite a success for the president. I congratulate him on that. But the talk of the massive investments that Brussels was going to, well, that the EU was going to make in the US, there's a practical point. There was talk, I think, of 750 billion purchases of energy from the US between now and the end of Trump's term. The capacity simply isn't there. You've seen energy companies already saying, no, great, we'd love to, but we don't have the capacity. And the second thing is the EU itself has no money. It is it does have money, it has a budget and all the rest, but it's not a very big one. And the EU can't make those investments. The only people that can make the investments are companies within the member states. And companies in the member states cannot, in any of them, be told by their governments, you have to invest $100 million in the US. So I think that promise, I mean, they can be encouraged to do it, they can be bribed to do it, but that promise is not really worth the paper it wasn't written on. And I think that if the tariffs fall away, then I think these are the deals wouldn't count very much. I do also think that all this vagueness that we are seeing, which is inevitable because of the way it's been done, is going to be a constant irritant in the next few years. And it is going to mean that the climate of uncertainty remains, which is going to deter investment wherever it happens. It's going to deter spending. And if we're talking about decades, I think you mentioned, I read an interview with someone, I think may have been from Alcoa last night, saying our decision whether to take to build a new smelter is based on assumptions lasting 40 years. Now, of course, 40 years assumptions are sort of meaningless, but you have to start with something. And if you don't know what the next 5 minutes are going to hold, you're not going to try and take a bet on 40 years.
Yeah, there have been several questions about this sort of strategic justifications for tariffs. Andrew has touched on some of those. Using tariffs to get other countries to get rid of their trade barriers. That's tried and true. That's been done for a very long time. The United States has done that. Other countries have done that. That's fine. It's really important though that we keep in mind that the bulk of the president's tariff agenda is not based on that. And if you look at what the president has been saying, and if you actually read the executive order, it's very clear that is not what he's doing, right? The U.S. executive order, or the president's executive order says that the U.S. has a trade deficit with the world, and therefore the U.S. needs to do tariffs in order to raise money. The other problem is, aside from the executive orders, is that the administration believes that tariffs are going to be a pay for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that just passed Congress. So they're including a lot of that in their budgeting, that they think that they're going to get a whole bunch of revenue from tariffs. If that is the case, that means that they're not being used strategically, because the whole point of the strategic use of tariffs is that the tariffs ultimately don't go into effect because you get the other country to reduce their tariffs. You get rid of yours. We end up with no tariffs on either side, which is great. That's what we want. But that means you don't raise any money because there's no tariff, right? So when you have the administration did this a couple of days ago, they put this post out on social media, said we raised $150 billion from tariffs. Well, that means you're not using them strategically. If you're using them strategically, they really shouldn't be raising very much revenue at all. They should be you know, threatened and then removed when the other country does what you want. The fact of the matter is, the president is putting 10% tariffs on countries with which we have trade surpluses. So even if you use his cockamamie justification of trade deficits, we still have tariffs on countries where we have trade surpluses of 10%. And so the administration is saying that they want these for revenue. They're also saying they want these for industry protection. And both of those things cannot happen if they are used strategically. And so their own logic and their own justification for this does not make sense and isn't going to work. And so that's the other issue with the sort of strategic explanation. I'm much more open to the strategic explanation in principle than I am to using it for revenue or using it for protection. But that's not what the president is actually doing. And it's important that we keep, you know, one of the tactics that protectionists will use is these very sort of high level abstract discussions about tariffs instead of looking at what's actually going on. And this relates to China too, right? In principle, I can see a lot stronger case for tariffs on a country like China than I can on tariffs for you know, the European Union or Canada. But we this is not an abstract question anymore. The United States has had very high tariffs on China since 2018. Continuously, because remember, Biden kept most of those China tariffs in place and actually raised some of them even higher, right? So the United States has had very significant tariffs on China since 2018. That's 7 years of sample size now. Um, has China gotten any freer? Has China gotten any less aggressive? Has China changed its behavior in ways that we want to at all? You know, you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the government's own report on this. Because those tariffs are done under different authority. Remember, those tariffs were upheld by the courts and are allowed because they are done under different authority that requires the administration to make reports to Congress about how the tariffs are going. So those reports have been coming out for several years now, and they all basically find China's behavior is not changing at all. China is doing exactly the same stuff that they were doing before, and the tariffs are basically having no effect on China's unfair trade practices, on their military buildup, on any of the stuff that the U.S. cares about. So at that point, you have to ask, okay, in principle, it might make some sense, but in practice, is it actually working? And I think the answer is no. And we've had 7 years now of trying this. So it's not like it was for lack of trying.
No, and I think the Chinese themselves, and I think we, you know, Dominic and I agree, and I think many people listening will agree that the Chinese play dirty when it comes to trade, and we are under no illusions, no naivety about that. They're not going to change their ways. Absolutely are not. But it is interesting to me that they use tariff cuts as a way of bringing countries within their orbit. And so if you look at what's going on in Africa at the moment, and there's a lot of resources in Africa, and China is extremely interested in resources, and that has been since Maoist days, actually. And they want secure supply lines. And so what they're doing, they look at some little country in Africa, which is probably a big country, but is economically small, but has some interesting resources. Suck it in. Throw it a loan to buy a bridge it doesn't really need, and allow them to sell what few things they can into China for the free trade. But what that does is it locks them in to China's economic orbit. And I do not think that we are operating in a way that we need to lock in those sort of countries into the orbit. One of the reasons that China has established such a dominant position in rare earths. And I make no apologies for Ramesh was teasing me about rare earths the other day. You're always talking about rare earths. Is that China has secured its position by sort of entangling these countries in, and it's doing it with Europe. Europe, if it came to it, if China was, and I hope we've just got a couple of minutes here, if China was to do something with Taiwan, you know, that is going to produce a crisis in Europe as to how they respond, because we have invested far too much in China ourselves, but the Europeans, proportionately speaking, have invested even more. and their hands are going to be tied. So conscious uncoupling we need to be doing.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm very pro Taiwan. For if the justification for this is getting tough on China and helping Taiwan, it doesn't make much sense that the president blocked the president of Taiwan from visiting the United States earlier this week and then announced 20% tariffs on Taiwan. That's not good, right? If we want to be standing up for freedom in Taiwan against the Chinese aggression, we shouldn't be so intimidated by the Chinese. The other important point about China is that their economic model stinks. We need to be clear about this. It's not like they're schooling us on the economics, right? China is at the peak of its industrial capacity right now. We're going to start seeing it getting eaten away by lower labor cost countries because China is not a poor country anymore. It's a middle income country. And we're going to see over the next, several decades, countries like India, which are much poorer, sort of eat into a lot of their manufacturing advantage and low labor costs and things like that. Places like Vietnam as well, and that's going to that manufacturing base is going to shift there, just like it shifted to China in previous decades. And the reason for that is the same as any other country. As countries become richer, the first thing that they do is they have a really big increase in their manufacturing and their industrial capacity, and then they have a decrease because the services sector takes off. And we're starting to see that in China. China's right at the beginning of that stage of development right now. So if that keeps going, expect their industrial capacity to decline in the future, not to increase as it has been in the past. And it's important to realize too, because China is not a capitalist system. This is a communist state guided economy. They have absurd debt problems. Okay, the United States has debt problems. We do. China's our next level, okay? Because not only do they have a massive sovereign debt problem, and they have an economy that they cannot stimulate no matter how much government spending they put into it, but they also have a huge private debt problem. Because unlike in the U.S., when you want to start a company, you go to the capitalists, you go to the stock market, you offer equity in your company, and that's how you get money to start up. Well, in China, they don't have that. They don't have those markets like that. They have debt, and so you go and you contract a whole bunch of debt. You would rather, if you're a business owner, and any business owner on this call will know this, you'd much rather be financed by equity than by debt because that doesn't have these massive implications for you to pay back. You pay back based on the performance and based on profits. That's good. That's what you want. That's how capitalism works. China, by and large, doesn't work that way. It's all debt financed, and so they have this enormous debt bubble over there that is going to cause huge problems because their population is declining because of the one-child policy, and because they're literally running out of people. Milton Friedman said if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, you'd have a sand shortage. It turns out if you put communists in charge of China, you have a people shortage, and that's what China is headed towards. So we should still be long-term optimistic about the United States, and it's because we have free markets, and it's because we have a limited government here relative to what they do in China. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm getting messages here saying that our time is up.
Yeah.
Many questions, and I wish we had time to answer them all. Somebody asks, will we do something on Javier Milei? You bet.
Yeah.
And read what he has to say about tariffs. And will we do something on, someone asked a question about the Jones Act. If anyone has 6 hours to spare, and I can get hold of the sedatives and other restraining devices, we can have Dominic Pino on the Jones Act. So we're looking forward to the next one. Please send us ideas for what you would like to talk about. I've enjoyed this. I hope you have, Dominic. I've really,
this has been great.
And the questions have been great. There are many I would have loved to have got to. And yes, to the next time. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes, we'll see you.